Close your eyes and imagine this. You're 19 years old. You're from a small town in Oklahoma. You've never been more than 50 miles from home until Uncle Sam drafted you. You've been fighting across Europe for months. You've seen your best friend die in your arms. You've killed men. You've become numb to death. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could prepare you for what you're about to see. It's April 29th, 1945. A cold Sunday morning outside Munich, Germany. The sky is the color of ash. You're marching with the 45th Infantry Division, the Thunderbirds. Your orders are simple: secure a German supply depot. Just another day, just another objective. Then you smell it. At first, you think it's a dead animal, maybe a horse killed in the fighting. But as you get closer, the smell gets worse. It's not one dead thing. It's something else, something you can't even comprehend. You see railroad tracks ahead, a train sitting there, completely still, 39 cattle cars, silent, waiting. Your lieutenant walks up to the first car and looks inside. He screams. Not a yell, not a shout, a scream. The kind of sound a man makes when his mind breaks. You run over. You look inside, and in that moment, you stop being a soldier. You stop being human. You become something else entirely, because what you see inside those cattle cars will haunt you until the day you die. And what you're about to do in the next hour will define whether you're a hero or a war criminal. This is the story of the Dachau liberation. The day American soldiers crossed a line. The day they committed what some call murder and others call justice. The day General Patton himself had to decide whether to prosecute his own men or burn the evidence. This is the story nobody wants to tell you, but you need to hear it. Let me paint you the full picture of what those American soldiers found. Inside those 39 cattle cars were 2,300 bodies. Not soldiers, not combatants. Men, women, children, Jews, political prisoners, priests, disabled people. Anyone the Nazis considered undesirable. They had been packed into those cars like cargo, locked inside with no food, no water, no bathroom, no air. The Nazis were evacuating prisoners from camps in the east as the Russians advanced. They loaded them onto trains and just left them to die. Some of the bodies had been there for weeks, decomposing, frozen together. But here's the part that broke these soldiers. Some of the prisoners were still alive. Barely. Skeletons with skin. Eyes that had given up hope days ago. And the ones who had survived the longest. They had bite marks on their arms and legs. Because when you're dying of thirst and starvation, when you've been reduced to a pure survival instinct, you'll do anything to live one more day, even eat the dead. One soldier, a farm boy from Kansas, later wrote to his mother. He said, "Mom, I thought I knew what evil was. I was wrong. This is what hell looks like. This is what the devil would create if he was real." Another soldier, a tough-as-nails sergeant who'd fought through Sicily and Normandy, sat down in the mud and wept like a child. His men had never seen him cry. Not when his brother died, not when half his platoon was wiped out in France. But this broke him. The medics tried to help the survivors. They gave them water, but some of them died anyway. Because their bodies were so starved they couldn't process food anymore. They died being rescued. Can you imagine that? You survive the camps, you survive the death march, you survive the train, and then liberation comes. And you die anyway because your body is destroyed to keep living. Asterisk. But the train was just the beginning. Lieutenant Colonel Felix Sparks was commanding the troops that day. He was a by-the-book officer, West Point trained. He believed in discipline, order, the rules of war. He shouted orders to his men. Keep moving. Don't stop. Don't look. We have a job to do, but you can't not look. You can't unsee it. They marched past the train, past the bodies, past the survivors clawing at them, begging for help. They reached the main gate of Dachau concentration camp. Now, here's what you need to understand about Dachau. This wasn't just any camp. This was the first, the prototype, the blueprint that the Nazis used to build every other death camp in their empire. Dachau had been operating since 1933. 12 years of systematic torture, medical experiments, executions, and industrialized death. Over 200,000 people had passed through these gates. Over 40,000 had died here. And the SS guards who ran this place, they weren't just following orders. They enjoyed it. They took pride in it. As the Americans approached the gate, they saw the SS guards scrambling. The camp commandant, Martin Weiss, had already fled like the coward he was. But he left behind a young SS lieutenant named Heinrich Wicker and about 500 SS men. Wicker knew the war was over. Germany was collapsing. Hitler would be dead in 2 days. So Wicker did what he thought was the smart thing. He decided to surrender like a gentleman. He put on his cleanest uniform, polished his boots until they gleamed, straightened his SS insignia. He walked out of the camp holding a white flag, expecting to be treated with military courtesy. Officer to officer, civilized, professional. He walked up to the American lines and said in practiced English, "I surrender this camp to the United States Army on behalf of the German Reich." The American officer looked at this well-fed, clean, arrogant Nazi standing there in his crisp uniform. Then he looked behind Wicker at the camp, at the smoke still rising from the crematorium, at the walking skeletons behind the fence, at the piles of bodies stacked like firewood. He didn't salute. He didn't shake hands. He stepped forward and spit directly in Wicker's face. That's when Wicker realized this wasn't going to be a normal surrender. Asterisk. When the Americans entered the camp, chaos erupted. 30,000 prisoners saw the American uniforms. 30,000 skeletons started screaming, crying, rushing the fences. They were shouting in a dozen languages. Americans, Americans, we're saved, we're saved. Some of them had been in Dachau for years. They'd given up hope. They'd watched friends die every single day. They'd survived on 200 calories a day, less food than you'd feed a pet. And now, finally, liberation. But while the prisoners were celebrating, something else was happening. The American soldiers were hunting. See, here's the thing nobody tells you about war. There are rules. The Geneva Convention, laws of warfare. You don't execute prisoners. You don't kill people who surrender, even if they're Nazis, even if they're monsters. You take them prisoner. You have a trial. You do things the civilized way. But civilization has a breaking point, and every single American soldier at Dachau that day reached it. Groups of SS guards tried to surrender throughout the camp. They'd throw down their weapons, raise their hands, and shout Hitler capit, Hitler capit. They thought this magic phrase would save them. They thought the Americans would just arrest them and move on. They were wrong. Near the coal yard, about 50 SS guards lined up with their hands raised. They were supervised by an American lieutenant. Most historians believe it was Lieutenant Jack Bushyhead, a Native American officer from Oklahoma. Bushyhead had just come from the crematorium. He'd seen the ovens still full of human ash. He'd seen the execution wall with bullet holes and bloodstains. He'd seen the medical experiment building where Nazi doctors had tortured prisoners to death in the name of science. He looked at these SS guards standing there, healthy, well-fed, arrogant, still expecting to be treated with military courtesy. He looked at his men. Their faces were stone. Their eyes were dead. They'd all seen the train. They'd all walked through the camp. Every single one of them had reached the same conclusion. Bushyhead didn't give a verbal order. He didn't need to. He just gestured with his Thompson submachine gun. Lined them up against that wall. The Germans suddenly understood. They started pleading. Nein, Geneva Convention, we surrender. Please. An American soldier nicknamed Bird Eye set up a .30 caliber machine gun on a tripod. The metallic sound of the gun being loaded echoed across the coal yard. He looked at Lieutenant Bushyhead. Bushyhead nodded. The machine gun opened fire. 10 seconds of sustained fire, screaming. Bodies falling. Blood spraying across the brick wall and the coal-black snow. When the smoke cleared, all 50 SS guards were on the ground. Most were dead. Some were still twitching. The snow was black with coal dust and red with blood. This wasn't the only execution that day. It was happening all over the camp. At Guard Tower B. SS men tried to climb down and surrender. The Americans shot them off the ladder. Their bodies fell into the moat below. Then the soldiers walked to the edge and emptied their rifles into the water just to make sure. At the administration building, 3 SS officers tried to negotiate their surrender. They wanted to discuss terms. The Americans shot them in the street. 1G later wrote home. It wasn't combat. It was an execution. And I didn't feel bad about it. After what I saw in those boxcars, they weren't human to me anymore. They were just things that needed to be exterminated. But the American soldiers weren't the only ones seeking revenge. The prisoners wanted blood to. Somehow, in the chaos, prisoners got out of their barracks. They were weak. They could barely stand. Most of them weighed less than 80 pounds. But they had adrenaline. They had rage. They had 12 years of torture fueling them. They found an SS guard hiding in a watchtower. The man was young, maybe 22. He was crying, begging for mercy. The prisoners dragged him down. They didn't have guns. They had shovels, pieces of wood, rocks, their bare hands, and they beat him to death. It took a long time, because they were so weak. But they took turns. Every prisoner who could walk took a swing. They wanted him to feel it. They wanted him to suffer the way they had suffered. American soldiers stood nearby, smoking cigarettes, watching. One young private asked his sergeant, "Shouldn't we stop them?" The sergeant took a long drag on his cigarette and said, "No, let them finish. They earned this." In another part of the camp, prisoners found a copper, a prisoner who had collaborated with the Nazis, who had beaten and tortured his fellow inmates in exchange for extra food. They dragged him to the latrine pit and drowned him in human waste. A group of prisoners found an SS doctor who had performed experiments on children. They threw him into the crematorium oven, alive, and they listened to him scream for 1 hour. Dachau was a lawless zone. There was no military authority, no rules, no civilization, just pure, primal justice. The victims became the judges became the executioners, and the United States Army simply looked the other way. Eventually, Lieutenant Colonel Sparks heard the gunfire. He came running. He saw his men executing prisoners. He saw the massacres happening everywhere. He fired his pistol into the air and screamed, "Stop! Stop it! What the hell are you doing?" One of his soldiers turned to him. The man was crying, not from sadness, from rage. He shouted back, "Colonel, they deserved it. You saw what they did." Sparks knew the man was right, but he was still an officer. He still believed in the rules. He managed to stop the killing. He locked up the surviving SS guards in a secure building to protect them from both his own men and the prisoners. But the damage was done. Somewhere between 50 and 100 SS guards have been executed that day. The exact number has never been confirmed. The secret couldn't last. Photographs had been taken. Some soldiers had cameras. They documented everything: the executions, the bodies, the coal yard massacre. In war, evidence as a way of surfacing. A few days later, an investigation team arrived at Dachau, led by Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Whittaker. He was a lawyer in civilian life, a man who believed in military justice and the rule of law. Whittaker interviewed the soldiers. He examined the bodies. He collected the photographs. He wrote a detailed report titled, "Investigation of Alleged Mistreatment of German Guards at Dachau Concentration Camp." The report was devastating. It concluded that American troops had committed war crimes. It documented multiple incidents of executing prisoners who had surrendered. It recommended court-martial proceedings for Lieutenant Bushyhead and several other officers, and enlisted men. According to military law, these men should have been prosecuted. They should have faced trial. They should have been convicted and sent to prison or even executed themselves. The report went up the chain of command. It passed through multiple hands, and finally, it landed on the desk of General George S. Patton. Now, Patton was a complicated man. He was a strict disciplinarian. He once slapped a soldier for having shell shock, calling him a coward. He court-martialed men for having dirty rifles or unpolished boots. He believed in military discipline, absolutely. But Patton was also a realist. He understood war in a way that paper pushers never could. Patton read the report. He looked at the photographs of the executed SS guards. Then he looked at the photographs of the death train, the crematorium, the gas chamber, the medical experiment rooms, the torture chambers. He called Lieutenant Colonel Whitaker into his office. Whitaker stood at attention, expecting Patton to sign the court-martial orders. Instead, Patton threw the report on his desk and said, "What is this garbage?" Whitaker replied, "Sir, it's evidence of war crimes committed by American personnel." Patton's face turned red. He stood up and shouted, "War crimes? You walk into a place like that, you see 2,000 dead bodies on a train. You see ovens full of human ash, and you expect my boys to follow the rulebook? Hell no." He paced around his office. Then he said something that became legendary. These men were overwrought. They had nervous trigger fingers. It happens in war. If I prosecuted every soldier who killed a German in anger, I'd have to court-martial half the damn army. Whitaker tried to argue. "Sir, international law." Patton cut him off. "International law. The Germans threw international law out the window when they built that camp. Those SS guards got exactly what they deserved. If anything, they got off easy. A bullet is too merciful for what they did." Then Patton did something extraordinary. He picked up the report, all the evidence, all the witness statements, all the photographs, and according to legend, he threw it in the fireplace and watched it burn. Other sources say he ordered it buried in the deepest, most classified file in the Army archives with orders that it never be opened. Either way, the result was the same. There would be no trial. Patton told Whitaker, "This investigation is closed. These men are heroes who liberated a death camp. They will be treated as such, dismissed." When the case reached General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the Supreme Allied Commander, he agreed with Patton. Eisenhower had personally visited concentration camps. He'd seen the horrors with his own eyes. He knew that putting American heroes on trial for killing Nazi monsters would destroy morale and make the United States look weak. The order came down from the top: quash the investigation, bury it, forget it ever happened. The charges were dropped. Every single soldier involved went home free. Lieutenant Jack Bushyhead returned to Oklahoma after the war. He never spoke about what happened at Dachau. Not to his wife, not to his children, not to anyone. He took the secret to his grave when he died in 1977. Many of the soldiers who were at Dachau that day suffered from what we now call PTSD. They had nightmares. They drank. Some committed suicide. But when asked if they regretted pulling the trigger, almost all of them said the same thing: "No, I'd do it again." One veteran said in a 1980s interview, "I know that killing prisoners is wrong. I was raised Christian. I was taught the 10 Commandments. But that day, at that place, pulling that trigger felt like the only right thing to do. Those men weren't human anymore. They'd given up their humanity when they put on that SS uniform and worked in that camp." Today, the Dachau reprisals remain controversial. Neo-Nazis use the story to claim both sides were bad. They point to the executions and say, "See, the Americans were war criminals too." But historians see it very differently. This wasn't a planned genocide. This wasn't systematic extermination. This was a human reaction to encountering pure evil. It was the breaking point of the human mind when confronted with industrial-scale horror. There's a philosophical question here that nobody wants to answer honestly. What would you have done? You're 19 years old. You've been fighting for your country. You've lost friends. You're tired, scared, and angry. And then you walk into Dachau. You see the death train. You see children starved to death. You see rooms full of bodies. You see ovens still full of human ashdot. And then you see the guards who did this, standing there, healthy, well-fed, asking for mercy they never gave. Do you arrest them? Do you process them through military justice? Do you imagine them getting a lawyer, a trial, maybe even being acquitted on technicalities? Or do you line them up against a wall? Be honest with yourself. In that moment, with that smell in your nose and those images burned into your brain, what would you do? The soldiers of the 45th Infantry Division made their choice. They chose vengeance. And General Patton chose to protect them because he understood something fundamental. There are some evils so great that normal rules don't apply anymore. Today at Dachau, there's a memorial. It honors the 41,000 people who died in the camp. There are plaques, monuments, and museums. Millions of people visit every year to remember the victims and learn about the Holocaust. But there is no memorial for the SS guards who were executed on April 29, 1945. Their bodies were buried in unmarked graves. Their names are forgotten. History has judged them. They were the architects of hell. They were the executioners of innocence. They were the men who reduced human beings to numbers and ash. And on that cold Sunday morning, they met their reckoning. The American soldiers who pulled the triggers carried that memory for the rest of their lives. Some were haunted by it. Others found peace. But none of them apologized, because, in the end, this story isn't about right versus wrong. It's about what happens when you push human beings to their absolute limit. It's about the breaking point, where civilization ends and pure human emotion takes over. The Dachau liberation was the day that the rules of war collided with the reality of the Holocaust. And in that collision, something had to break. The question isn't whether those soldiers were right or wrong. The question is, could any human being in that situation have acted differently? I'll leave you with that thought. This is history that matters. This is a story that needed to be told. And now you know the truth about what really happened when American soldiers found Dachau.